But I've known Cecilia for a while now. We've worked together for a while, and whenever we were looking for a keynote, she came to the top of the list just because of her impressive resume, but also because she's a really good speaker and a really nice person. And we love to have her here. So she's actually been working for, it says 26 years, but I think that really is just 6 years, because there's no way it's 26 years, in public and academic libraries. And she's the director of library services for the city of North Richland Hills. And I'm reading off my notes because I know this stuff, but I don't trust myself. And before that, she was the director at Decatur Public Library, which was awarded the runner-up for the best small library in America when she was there. And she's also worked at Flower Mound Public, University of North Texas, where she got her master's degree in library and information science and a master's degree in English. So she is a librarian through and through, folks. And she is currently the president of the Public Library Administrators of North Texas, which is a group of library directors. I think there are 80 members now across North Texas. And she was most recently in 2019, 2020, the president of TLA, which is the Texas Library Association. And she led us through kind of the pandemic and really helped pull things off there. So just want to thank her for that. And without any further ado, I'll let her come up and start talking. So thank you, Cecilia. I appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here, to be face to face, so to speak with people for the first time in about 18 months. And I'm excited because I love koha. I think that's why Spencer wanted me to come, because I'm like really good at cheerleading things that I love, and I love koha. It's really changed how we do our community. So before I get too deep in, I kind of just want to like get a feel for where everybody's from, what kind of experience you have with koha. So how many of you are already koha libraries? Okay. How many of you are the system administrators for your koha? Okay. How many of you have been through a migration from another commercial ILS to koha? Oh, okay. So you guys have had all the experiences. Great. So then a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to resonate with you guys, I think. I'm going to talk about why open source matters. So to begin, I want to share with you guys how I actually okay. Why I actually became connected associated with a user of open source software. I started as a library director in a really small rural community, Decatur, which is north of here, Decatur, Texas. And as a new library director, the first thing that I wanted to do was familiarize myself with the community, the staff, the workflows, and the budget. And it was all going really well until I looked at the budget. And then I saw that our commercial ILS is actually taking 20% of my overall budget. That included staff, collections, everything we did as a library. It was taking 20%. I was shocked. I'd never heard of such a thing. So I was immediately on the hunt for new ILS because I needed to free that money up to better serve my community. So I started looking at the other commercial ILS vendors and found out, oh, it's all going to be this much. All right, this is what I have to do with now. So, I traveled a lot and I went to a plant conference. And that year at the plant conference, which is the Public Library Administrators of North Texas, the presenter was from Georgia, where they had the Georgia Pine system. And that was my first experience with seeing how open source could work and serve people, serving an entire state. They were all connected. They had a universal water. It's amazing. And then he started to talk to us about how much it cost. My job at the floor. I was like, what is this? So I got together with a few other rural library directors. At the time, I believe there were 12 of us. And we formed a consortium. And we all migrated out of our commercial systems into, at that time, Evergreen. Sorry to talk about the competition, but koha, just for the record, is an extension. And so our consortium is still in place. That consortium is still in place. I'm no longer a member, but I served as president for that consortium. I was an advocate for open source for years in the capacity of working with that consortium. And so at the end, the happy ending to that particular story is that once we migrated over, my ILS was making up less than 2% of my overall budget costs. Radical change. So if I were to talk about why people should go to open source, I would say that open source saves libraries money. Do we need another reason? Can I just like libraries save money using open source. But the other frustration that I had at the time before we migrated over to an open source system was I was trying to run reports to get a feel for who was using what in my community, and was having some frustration and some difficulty. I couldn't get the data that I wanted out of the system. And I thought, oh, wait, I paid them 20% of our budget. I can call them and they will help me. Logical assumption, right? So I called and I said, oh, no, our reports don't have that functionality. What do you want to do? Oh, okay, well, I pay you X amount. Is it possible that you can make it do that? I was naive. And they said, no. I said, well, how will I ever get this to happen? And they said, well, you can fill out this form online, and it'll go into a pool. And once every 6 months, a committee gets together, and they look at that pool of all the requests, the development requests from all the libraries in the US. And that committee will pick 2 or 3 that are financially viable. Oh, well, what if mine doesn't get picked? You can submit again. End of story. Wow. So I was so frustrated by A, I was paying all of this money, right? And B, when I needed the system to do something, which to me seemed like a basic function of an iOS, they couldn't do it, and there was no way for me to make that happen. So I was really, really frustrated with the functionality as well. So you would think that was, I'm going to be honest, that was about 17 years ago, a long time ago. So you would think in 17 years, the things would have progressed, right? The things have changed. Technology has changed. It's easier to do things with technology. You would think that was different now. So right here. So I need to stay here. If that's going to be a problem, I'm a mover, but I'll try. So that was 17 years ago. Technology has changed. We would think that the responsiveness of the commercial vendors would be better now, right? Well, I'm going to read to you a quote from the 2020 Library Journal ILS review, which said that one of the major ILS providers had said that they were sorry for the delays in development of new and requested features due to, and I quote, private equity ownership devaluing development, which is a fancy way of saying we're not going to make any money off this, right? When there's a commercial interest associated with the development of your library's needs, the commercial interest is always going to win, right? So that's the cool thing about using open source, is that there isn't anyone financially interested in whether or not you're successful. You are responsible for whether or not your ILS is successful. And guess what? If you can't do it with the code access, there is a whole community of people to support you and to help you, because that's what libraries do, they share. So if you're waiting with a commercial vendor to have your development come into place, it could never happen. It's a possibility. It could never happen. If you're the only library that needs this thing, you need information about your community and how they're using your system, but you're the only library because every community is unique, then it may never happen. So open source exerts competitive pressures, both in cost, right, and in innovation. And so I think that that's really critical. There's a common expression that's used in the broader open source community, which says that either the users control the program or the program controls the users. So what does that mean for us as libraries if we're using an open source or commercial vendor? Well, it means that either the company that we're paying to support us is controlling how we use our ILS and how our community uses our ILS, and therefore how we're serving our community. Or if we're using open source, we are controlling the program that serves our community, right? So who do you think has a better understanding of your community needs? Would it be you or ProQuest? Would it be you or EBSCO? It's always going to be you. It's always going to be you. So open source for libraries is not just about cost savings and control. It's about empowering the library community to have a voice in our collective future. It's about taking the power back. One of the things that I love about open source And I'm really fortunate, and I'm going to call someone out. We have Michael at my library. So sometimes I can make this decision, and like 10 minutes later, he's like, oh yeah, it's done. So the ability to make a decision to serve your community on the spot in that moment and to have it happen that quickly is obviously, that rapid development is obviously an advantage. And I think that the last 18 months have shown us more than ever how critical that is, how critical rapid development on the spot changes to our ILSs. So I'm going to share a few things that we did at North Richland Hills. And if your library did these things as well, just raise your hand. And I bet we're going to be hands up everywhere. Did you have to change library closure dates? Did you have to change and extend due dates? Did you have to turn off overdue notices and fines? Yeah. Did you have to implement some sort of online card system? Did you have to implement some sort of curbside pickup or holds lockers? Did you have to work from home? Did your ILS allow you to do all of those things? Did it allow you to do it rapidly? Right? So when I was thinking about that, about how quick our response was, I thought, well, I wonder how it was with a commercial vendor. It's been a long time since I worked with a commercial vendor. And I saw online that an article that stated, and I'm going to read this because I think it's really interesting. So I'm going to read directly from it. So it says that during the pandemic, almost all commercial ILS vendors provided support, especially through rapid development or implementation of functionality that supported newly instituted workflows, such as online selection and checkout and curbside pickup. And abrupt building closures prompted a need to update policy calendars controlling due dates and notices. And they gave a couple of specific examples. For example, Biblionics during the pandemic went to charging their users a usage fee instead of like a standard flat rate. So what you paid was based on how much your catalog was used. And Innovative allowed their existing customers to have access to their mobile app for free for 1 year. So if you think about that on a cursory glance, it looks like, oh, well, they were helping their customers. They were trying to do the right thing. But the more that I thought about that, the more I thought, first of all, how long will these changes stay in place? I bet the second that it's not politically incorrect to dump these three services, they are going to dump them. And I also thought, really thought, my big thought was, why does it take a global emergency for a commercial ILS to properly support the libraries that are paying them exorbitant support fees? Why does it take that? And if they can do it during a pandemic, why don't they respect their libraries enough to do it all the time? So that's what I thought. I guess it's a negative worldview, but so be fast, have no regrets. That's one of the things that we can do with an ILS. It gives us the control. So I'm going to step aside from the reasons that I stated about why open source matters in the general sense for just a moment to talk about what I know about Koha and open source with libraries for the last few years. It's just going to be a really quick overview. But we all know that Koha was the first free and open source ILS and the most implemented worldwide. And when they started in 2001, they had a single library. And right now they have over 1,500 libraries is what I was able to research online. If that's incorrect, I'll holler. And also they went from 2009 to 2019, they went from 2 employees to 25 employees. So what do these sets of numbers tell you? So there's a growing demand from libraries to have that control back, to better serve their citizens. And that's reflected not only in Koha's growth, but in the fact that they laid the foundation for so many other open source ILS systems. They've now Evergreen, Opals, Open Biblio, Invenio, PBM, NextGen, Librarian, BiblioQ, right? So there are options that we didn't have 10 years ago. And then from there, we also started to see that as libraries adopted open source for the ILS, other platforms that we use for services started becoming available. And we started to see things like LibKey, which is the Koha open source web management and print management, and Coral, which is an open source electronic resource management product, and Omeka, which is a free database that lets you create online collections and do exhibits, and Viewfind and Neatline. And a lot of libraries are now moving to Ubuntu Linux distributions for their public PCs. And here in Texas, we have a great program that's funded by the Texas State Library called eRead Texas, which is a open source e-reading program for libraries in Texas. And while you're here at the conference, please make sure to stop by and see the Open Source Observatory, where you can see a lot of examples of what McKinney is doing with open source. So open source is definitely on the radar now for libraries, right? I mean, it's the way that the future of libraries, I think, is going to go, because we have small budgets and we can't give 20% of our budgets to our technology. So now I'm jumping back again. I'm going to go to why I think that open source is important, not just in the broader sense, but specifically to libraries. So why is open source important to libraries? So I like this quote. I'm not sure I would say it's a moral thing, but I think where libraries are concerned, it's an ethical thing, right? It falls in line with a lot of our ethics. What is the foundation of what libraries do? What is it that we do? We share. We share collections. We share knowledge. We share space. We share everything that we have available in our libraries, whether it's virtual or in person. That's the core of who we are. It's about equitable access for everyone. We share. And so if libraries are about equitable access and openness and sharing, then isn't it sort of important that we seek out, associate, and support resources and products that reflect those values? So open source products are fundamentally aligned not only with this core mission, sharing, equitable access, not only with that, but with several of our professional values that are outlined by the American Library Association. So these are the core values as defined for us as access, confidentiality, privacy, diversity, democracy, education, the public good, preservation, professionalism, service, and sustainability. And I think that if I would give it enough time, because I'm from Texas and I can talk, y'all. If I was given enough time, I could probably figure out an argument on how open source reflects all of these values. For example, if you host your own ILS and you are supporting it and taking care of it yourself, are you not therefore adding an extra level of security and privacy and confidentiality for your patrons? Probably so. And what is open source if not democratized access to software? So I could make an argument for all of these, but I only have 30 minutes. So I'm going to talk about these four because I think they really fall in line with open source. So the first one I'm going to talk about is access. So libraries are about access, equitable access. And I think that there are two ways in which we can think about how open source supports access. The first one is the example that I started with, my small rural library in Decatur, where I really couldn't afford that ILS that we were paying for. It was taking money away from serving my community, and it was a poor community, and it needed services. It didn't need 20% of my budget to be going out the window for an ILS. So the first way is that open source makes a really high quality functional ILS available to small and rural libraries that have little to no budget. There are libraries in the state of Texas that are completely funded by donations and ran by volunteers. So when we talk about access, open source gives the libraries access, which in turn allows those small and rural libraries to give often economically repressed communities access as well. I would also say that you can use open source creatively to help meet the individual equity needs within your community. So that sounds a little abstract. So I'm going to give you an example. At my library for the last few months, we've been talking about a project that we want to do to reach underserved areas of our community. We want to put holds lockers and book drops. That was our original plan. And we were going to put them, we've identified some parks that were in underserved parts of our community. And we had identified a potential Section 9 apartment complex. And so we were, hyped up about this. We were going to apply for some grant money. We were going to reach the underserved. And then as we started to move forward with that, we have an EDI work group within my library. And our EDI work group did a virtual meeting with Sonia Irving, who is Equity and Inclusion Manager for Multnomah County Libraries. And when you talk about EDI and libraries, they are well ahead of the curve. So we wanted to listen to her and to find out what we could do to better serve not only our staff, but our community, ensuring equitable access. And one of the things that she mentioned was that when you talk about serving underserved populations, one of the things we often neglect is the fact that they don't have access to technology, or if they're not library users, they don't know how to use library technology, right? So then I thought, oh, we're going to put hold lockers and book drops in the parks and the apartment complex, but the people living there probably haven't used the library, and this is what they would see if they did have access to technology. Now, I love our interface. It's great. If you are used to using a library, this makes sense to you. There's a book river. What is this? What is this right here in the middle? New books, right? We have drop downs on the side for special collections. We have a big search at the top. You can log in. But if you've never used the library catalog before, or if you don't have technology available to even get here, how are you going to place holds and pick up books at my home libraries? So that's where open source comes in. Here, ready, Michael, here's the project. After doing a little bit of research, what we realized is that we're going to include a very, very basic interface kiosk right next to the hold lockers and the book drop. And it's just going to say, what are you looking for? And then as you get results, it's going to have information that guides you through how to place a hold so that we can address, maybe I don't have the technology. We'll just walk up here. Maybe I never worked with a library catalog. You don't have to. What are you looking for? So we're using the power of open source, which if I had a commercial vendor, I'm pretty sure this would be a process if I could get it done at all. We're using open source to meet our patrons where they are. So access. Open source absolutely supports access. Intellectual freedom. Information wants to be free. You are probably all aware of the expression that's when you talk about open source, they say it's open and free. And a lot of times, particularly if you've not heard that expression, you would assume free means as in cost. It's open and you don't pay for it. Well, that is true. But what free means in this instance is free like liberty, like it needs to be free where people can get to it. Doesn't that sound a lot like intellectual freedom? When we say, no one will decide who reads what. And you can read, watch, listen to whatever you want from my library without us intervening. And then you can do with that information and that knowledge whatever you choose to do, right? That is freedom. Well, it applies to software as well. And what they talk about when they talk about software being free are the 4 essential freedoms, which are the freedom to run the program as you want, the freedom to study how the program works and change it so it does what you want, the freedom to redistribute, to share with your neighbors. That sounds like libraries too. The freedom to redistribute copies of modified versions. This is what it means when they say that open source software is free. And that sounds a lot like libraries, right? So libraries and open source communities share the common value of respecting the rights of the individual to decide for themselves what resources they will use and how they will use them. They're right there, hand in hand. And then, of course, you can't really talk about your ILS or open source or libraries without talking about service. They're all greatly interconnected. Of course, an open source ILS helps you to better serve your community because when you need it to do something, you make it do it. You listen to your patrons say, why don't your brand new DVDs come up in this order? Oh, we can do that, right? Service on the spot. Michael, how long would it take for you to change how displays results display? A long time? Help me with my So of course, service goes hand in hand with an open source ILS and with libraries. It also provides us with professional development. When ALA talks about service, they also talk about how we as librarians have an obligation to continue to grow and develop our skills. Well, if you work with an open source ILS, you will grow and develop your skills. And those technology skills are going to transfer. You're going to be more confident, and it's going to transfer into other parts of your work, and it's going to grow you as a professional and allow you to better serve your community. And finally, the last one I want to talk about is sustainability. So when I talk about sustainability, I'm not talking about environmental sustainability. I'm talking about economic feasibility and sustainability. We live in a society where when something breaks, we throw it away and we buy a new one. And we do this over and over and over, right? But with open source ILS, you don't ever have to discard the old. You just modify the existing and it becomes the new. So it's sustainable. It's also economically sustainable because if you have an entry cost at all, it's a pretty low one, right? There's a little bit of a cost to get in if you use an outside contractor to help you. But once you're in, you're in. If you've ever worked with a commercial vendor, a lot of times they're going to have licensings and restrictions. So if you do a great job in your community and you get more users and you get more staff, then you're penalized because now you have to buy more licenses. And so with open source, it grows with you organically. There's no additional license. There's nothing else you have to purchase. It just grows with you. And so doesn't that make it sustainable in some sense? Because they can be, an open source product can be modified to meet your changing community, changing circumstances, or changing needs. And so it won't become obsolete. And therefore it is in that sense sustainable. So open source provides libraries with a low cost, customizable way of meeting our community's needs. It's in line with many of our core values: sharing, access, intellectual freedom, service, sustainability. I'm sure that everyone in this room knew all of this intellectually before I started to talk about it today. It's not new, right? But I felt like it was worth readdressing and thinking about. And I'd like for you guys to think about it over the course of the conference and when you get back home. And it's because I want to give you some challenges that I've been giving myself lately. So these challenges are for you guys as you go through the conference and you meet people and when you get back home. First, let's grow the open source community. So when you get back home to your libraries, call up your neighboring libraries and say, hey, let me tell you about this great ILS we have and how well it's been working for us. Do you want to have a demo? My staff would be happy to show you the back end, the front end, whatever you need. You know how much we're having to pay for support? How much do you pay? Maybe we should have a partnership like the recent Metro Share that started in North Texas. Just recently, some small and mid-sized libraries came together and formed a koha consortium. It's going to better allow them to serve their communities. It's going to save them money. So win-win. So grow the open source community by reaching out to others. My other challenge for you guys would be to seek other open source alternatives, right? So look at the things that you're paying for at your library, because we pay for a lot of things. We're suckers, y'all. So think about this. Do you pay for print management? Do you pay for self-checks? Do you pay for PC management? Do you pay for your desktop software? Do you pay for your email platform that you use to communicate with your patrons? Do you pay for your collection management systems? And I'm going to give you a really quick example of moving away from that. We pay a relatively high cost for a collection management software product. And next year is our last year, and we're going to not renew our contract because Michael was able to duplicate the super majority of every report we get from them using Koha. And now we're going to have $12,000 to put back into our budget for other things. So look at alternatives, other open source alternatives. Koha is an amazing start, but don't stop there. Oh, my last one. And identify ways to use open source to better serve your communities, especially your underserved communities. It will do what you want it to do. You have that control. So go and identify the needs of your underserved populations and think about how you can use Koha to bridge that divide. So those are my challenges for you for the conference and when you get back home. I appreciate you letting me talk about libraries and open source today. You want me to do questions, or does anyone have questions?
Please, if you have questions, please.
All right. It wasn't a have-to, so there probably aren't a lot of questions.
Is he a genius, or could somebody could, does it take, yeah, no,
It's just pretty much, I
I would say what Michael has is dedication to our community, intelligence, and determination and patience. So if you have those, I would say, and Michael, I guess, would agree that if you have these qualities, that you can do it. Yeah. Okay.
Will Michael share these reports?
Yes, of course. All right. Okay. Thank y'all very much.